Hi, this is Bryant with Slam, and on this week's Slam Presents, we're here with Kelly Hartman, who is a Bozeman creative. That is a writer, a painter, a printmaker, a weaver, a jeweler. She really encompasses the whole creative spectrum. So today we're going to talk about a few of her pieces and just where her inspiration comes from. So, as somebody who takes on so many creative mediums, where does all your inspiration come from?
It all comes from the world around me, nature specifically. I am blessed enough to be able to walk to work every day down the Galligator Trail, which is just amazing. I feel really blessed to live in Bozeman for that reason, but there's so much inspiration in the colors and the changing of the seasons, and I've always loved nature, but I feel like it's really become more of a part of all of my artwork in many different ways, but it all comes back to that.
So nature is your central inspiration.
Exactly, yeah. It's where I find my calm too, I feel. So this print was actually inspired by a hike that I did up Triple Tree. It's kind of that last view before you come down that big hill at the end there, and the sun it was a sunset and it was beautiful. But it's the first time that I've really broken something up into like different layers, thinking about colors differently. One of the greatest things about working with printmaking is I got an iPad, and so I can draw in these different elements layer by layer and then break everything down, so I could take a photograph and create something from that. And so that's kind of what inspired this piece, and then the silhouette trees, those were fun to do.
So what's the name of this piece?
This is Triple Tree Trail, Bozeman, Montana.
Do you name all your pieces based off of where the inspiration comes from, or that just happened to be this piece?
I usually do. Yeah. I've always had a hard time naming things philosophically. Maybe because I went to art school, everybody does, or everything's untitled. So a place is such an important thing to me. Everything is inspired by a place, and I think it's cool for people to know. Like I have some pilot and index peak things, and people see that name and they.
It's like a geographic record of where you've been.
Exactly, yeah.
Your art captures your adventurous life.
Yep, yeah.
So you're talking about the layers. Is that your favorite part about this? And kind of explain the process of how you create that and how you know when it's time to add more layers and when it was like, this is complete.
Yeah. So getting started, I in the iPad especially, being able to do different layers, you're thinking like where my white's going to be. So that's my first thought, because you have white paper, so you might as well use that as a layer. It's helpful. So that first, and then for this one I really started with this orange first. So actually this whole piece was orange as the first layer, and then you block off that little section and then the next orange and all the way on up. So the blues were one of the last things, and then of course the overlay was actually done on a separate screen, but everything else is reduction. So you just keep crossing out what you want to keep, and then print back on top what you want for the next layer. It's always hard. Like some layers turn out great, and some you're like, ooh, that wasn't quite what I was expecting. What's great is you can just reprint it with a different type of ink or anything like that. So it's pretty forgiving actually as a medium. Maybe not quite so much as painting, where you can just scrape that out or cover it up right away, but it is a pretty forgiving medium, and I love the layers, to see it build up, and it's a cool thing to share as well, especially on social media, where you see those steps, the progression
you have an
of
iPad
something.
and you could just time lapse it, so it becomes you could see the creation in real time.
Exactly, yeah. So I just started this piece this last week, and it's a view from a cornfield out in Manhattan. So cool. I've built up to the first layer of the corn so far. It's still got a long ways to go, but it will pull in a lot of those same kind of those oranges and yellows into the corn layer. But it's just cool to see how it builds up, and it's scary. Like, had this beautiful blue scene, and then you're like,
now it looks more
throwing this
abstract
mess on there, which actually, it surprises me too. There are things about that I really enjoy. I'm usually pretty meticulous, especially with my painting. I've always had a hard time letting it be, just letting go. So to have something where you're like, wow, actually that kind of looks cool, and it's not, necessarily, it just happened.
So that's something I always like to ask and kind of figure out. When you start that piece and like you were inspired when you were hiking Triple Tree, you had this idea in your mind for a piece. How much of that finished product was already in your head when you set out to start creating it? And how much of that did you find organically in the process of creating it?
A lot of it's already in my head. I always think I can't work fast enough for everything that's in here. I mean, I could look at, anything and be like, oh, I know exactly how I'd break that down, and you gotta like
So
get
you
going
really
with
have a
it.
plan. You're
I
more of
do.
an artist with like, this is how it's going to be the
Yes.
outline. You really stick to
Yep.
your outline.
Yeah, definitely. Although, there are happy accidents too. I think color is the biggest thing that becomes kind of an accident for me, because it always dries a little bit different. So you're never quite sure. Like this ended up almost more of a purple kind of tone in there than I was expecting, but I'm happy with the way that turned out. So that's the part that maybe always is a surprise for me.
Just how the
because
colors will interact with each other.
Yeah. I'm not very meticulous in the mixing. I've always been like, I want a brownish color, and just go with that.
So you have freedom in what the actual color is, but in terms of placement and overall design, you really know where you're going from the beginning.
Exactly. Yeah.
So is it at all scary then to show a piece that's halfway in progress?
Yeah, a little bit. I
You feel
debated about
exposed
bringing
right
it today
now?
because I was like, well, this isn't what it's gonna look like at all. It's gonna look better. But yeah, it is. But it's also fun to share. I do try to share as much as I can on my Facebook and Instagram, because I think I like bringing people along for the journey, especially on something where it builds up and you get to see the end product and
Do you like to
experience
use gradients at all? You kind of have distinct layers, but do you have more pieces that are a bit like kind of blend a little bit more, or that's kind of your signature style?
Yeah, I haven't done a whole lot that way. I think it's how I think about the shapes of color that's kind of kept me to doing these layered pieces. But I've definitely been interested in doing like the rainbow roll type of a thing, because then you could get a lot more bang for your buck on some of these layers, especially something like this. Actually, you could get by with using different colors on one roller and get that same effect. But there's something to the layering that I've been enjoying. It is a little bit different than like my painting style, which isn't at all like this.
So here you kind of have like distinct, they almost do kind of mirror each other, each layer. So did you kind of know how you would have that, or that in your mind you even saw kind of how the shape of each layer would work out, or is that something that came more to life when you were actually on the paper?
Actually, as I was working, yeah, I kind of just thought that's enough, to keep or whatever, just sort of threw it on. And it may be like just the way that I tend to make that shape, that they all ended up somewhat mirroring each other. What I really do like about using this medium and the way that I'm using it now, which is very different than, I wish I would have brought some of my older work, so I was a little bit more meticulous in drawing everything out, but this, it was really a lot more like drawing as I was going, like I did on the iPad, where I was just like, a little bit of color there, and I tried to mirror that effect on here. And well, it's a little bit more freeing, but then it's also so thought out,
So when you were hiking, were you inspired like on the actual hike? You were like, this will be a great picture, or did you just take it in the moment, and then you got home to your studio, and then in the studio you kind of had a snapshot of the memory of your hike?
The second one's definitely this case. I actually took that picture about a year and a half ago, and was like, actually that would make a cool print. The Manhattan one, I'd already done this one at that point, and when I was there, I did the corn maze out there, and was like, that's a print. Like I knew right away that I love the layers of what I'm seeing and being able to see the bridgers and everything. So this one definitely was inspired by that right away.
Which I guess on most of your works, you think as an artist, are you always looking for that inspiration, or are you just kind of living more organically and then you just see when the thought comes? Or when you're out in nature, are you hunting for that next inspiring scene?
I think I've become more of a hunter recently. I didn't always used to, but now I'm seeing everything in terms of what can I create from it. Sometimes it's this, sometimes it's, I want to go back and paint that spot. Or I'm inspired by the colors that I've taken in a photograph and use that for weaving, things like that. I'm just always inspired by what's around me. But I think I'm looking for it more and more.
And both of your parents are wildlife photographers, so do you ever talk about that, about finding the right inspiration? And do you think you got that from them?
Probably, yeah, definitely. Because my dad's really always been into the more naturalist side of things. So it's not for him like, is this a great shot of this animal? I mean, that's part of it. But is this something that this animal's interesting that he's doing? So he's a lot more interested in like the whole lifestyle of an animal. So if he can get like a feeding or something like that tells a story more so than just like, oh, is this a great image? So he spends a lot of time observing and sitting with animals, and so I spent my whole childhood waiting for the female owl to come in.
Oh yeah? Have you
Yeah.
finally seen it?
Oh yeah, many.
Many times?
Many, yeah.
So do your parents do more landscapes or more like animals or objects?
A little bit of both. A lot of the stuff that Dad's been doing recently is in the Beartooth, actually. He's been doing a project on pica and global warming. And so a lot of that takes into account like the animal and this broad landscape that it lives in. And I think that's been a progression for him. I think it started out a bit more with the animal, and now people are kind of interested in the landscape.
And what about you? Do you paint animals or is it more landscapes?
I don't paint animals at all.
No, just landscape?
Yeah, no, I'm definitely, actually I have one of mine here, but yeah, I'm definitely more of a landscape artist for sure. I do plein air, so I paint everything on site. I have a really hard time painting in the studio, although I did do a series of still lifes during the beginning of this whole COVID thing. I was like, I gotta find something to like occupy my mind.
So what is the name of this piece?
This one's Mountain Home, and it's kind of one of the last turns as you're coming into Cook Pass, just above Cook City. So these are some of the mountains up above there, Henderson and those mountains. So anytime I go out there, I tend to bring my paints. And this was actually part of the plein air along the Yellowstone that they do every year in Livingston, which is something I always look forward to.
So what type of paint is this?
This is oil paint.
And the last one was what medium?
These are ink.
Ink.
Yeah, yep.
And do you prefer ink or paint?
They're totally different things, for sure. So that is more like studio based. I think people do it. I'm not sure that I would have a hard time doing that. So totally different. But this is, it's a lot more of building things like one shape and then building kind of more around it rather than like front to back or kind of more like when you do printmaking. So I feel like you're like constantly looking for those color changes and things that are happening. So I tend to get really lost when I'm doing, in a good way, plein air painting, because you're just constantly looking
You're
for
in
those.
the moment.
Yep.
So
yep.
do you kind of set aside that like I'm going to paint on these hours, so you just grab your stuff and you just hike out to a spot and you're like, I'm just going to be here. And so you're originally from Cook City, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So you knew this spot before you went to paint.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you then did you have this spot already in mind? It's part of like you're pretty cerebral when it comes to knowing what you're going to paint, or did you just go for a hike that day until you found the right spot and you're like, today this is the spot for me?
Yeah, I had actually never painted at this spot before. My mom said, the lupin is really beautiful. You should try Cook Pass. And so I did a couple of swings by it in the car, trying to pick out that spot, and then hiked off to the side. And so I guess it was like a little bit of both. I know that I love this view, but getting the flowers was kind of a different thing for me. But sometimes, when I used to live out in Cook City, I would go up to the Beartooth every day, pretty much, to paint. And some days I'd just be like driving back and forth and driving back because everything looked so good. I'm like, this spot, no, this spot, no, this spot. And it's like, you just got to pick one. So I feel like now I'm a little bit more focused, and you're going to find something to paint wherever you end up setting up. Like we could sit right here and pick a little square and paint that, and it would be interesting. But sometimes I explore the same places over and over and over again as well.
Do you always end up with a finished piece, or you go out there and you just start painting and then you're like, no, this is just not, I can't finish this?
Yeah, a little bit of both.
A little bit of both?
Yeah. Usually I end up with finish. Usually I paint a little bit smaller as well. Kind of depends on the time. I hate leaving things unfinished. But I've definitely had some where it's like, ooh, that didn't work. Or the light changes so much, a storm comes in or something, and you're like, well, I can't paint anymore.
So then do you go back and you try and finish that, or is it kind of the painting done since you're never going to be able to recapture the right temperature and the right air color and quality at that point?
Exactly, yeah. I only paint on site. It's just how I feel about it. I have a hard time in the studio. I just can't get that same feeling. without that piece in front of me.
So then, how much do you think the canvas picks the painting? Because it's like you're out there and your painting obviously is like, it gives you a size limit of what your view is. So you go out there and you find the right spot. Then does the canvas help bring that final picture to life? Or do you try and like just, is it more about the view you want to capture so you'll zoom out more?
I'd say a little bit of both as well. I do like a sketch on to start off. So I always start with a burnt sienna type background, just because it allows you to build up and down from it with the colors. And I'll just like throw down a quick sketch, and sometimes, you get that sketch on there, and then, halfway into painting it, you're like, oh, I wish I had that little bit over there in my painting. Why didn't I like notice that? I'm not very good at planning them out very, very much, which is totally different than my printmaking, where I plan things out like crazy. And this, I kind of just start going. I know that there's like certain elements that I want to have. I think it helps having an art background where you kind of intuitively know like composition sort of basics. Sometimes I'll end up with one that's just
here
awful.
You're really going with it and you're trusting that nature's going to be the right inspiration at that moment. Do you also think that's the medium? Because here you're painting, it kind of blends more.
Yeah.
And with the ink and the fact that you could be on an iPad, it could be so distinct in layer that you really could create something, scratch it, and start over with the layer.
Exactly.
As here, you're just like your brush hits and you just flow with it.
Yep, definitely.
So how long does something like this take you in nature?
This was about 2 hours, I'm guessing. I'm a pretty quick painter.
What is the longest you've ever gotten caught just painting out in nature?
On one canvas, I mean, I have spent more than one sitting before, and they never turn out as good, to tell you the truth, because there's something about like, then I start to get in my head as to what it's supposed to look like a bit more, because you take it home, you like sit with it, oh, tomorrow I'm gonna like, and it just doesn't have the same quick kind of emotive feel as other paintings. So I do usually just kind of limit it, and whenever it's done, that's the point. It's hard to know when to stop also.
So this is much more an emotional piece than people might realize.
Yeah.
That this is really how you feel in the moment, and that's kind of the beauty of it, is you could throw it out and you could push yourself as hard as you can, because when it's done, it's done.
Yep. Yeah, definitely.
So do you feel that the process of using ink is far less emotional and more cerebral?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. It's a calming sort of a thing, because once you know what your layer is going to be like, and I usually do, for these ones I'm trying to get 15 in an edition, so I print about 20, because you figure each layer you might have a mistake, so you kind of got to plan for that. Then once you're doing the ink, it's great just put on some classical music or whatever, or a TV show, and just start inking away. You don't have to think at that point. But the planning part of it, that is like, I write it all down, like this color and this layer.
While
it's not always
what
like
difference.
I know,
You're so extreme in the two mediums.
It is, yeah.
So does one help teach you, or is it kind of like, is it super helpful in the fact that here I could be super disciplined because I know any emotional or kind of just super quick creative outlet is going to be in a different medium, so it allows you to kind of be more compartmentalized in how you go about the process?
I think so, yeah. I enjoy thinking both ways. I couldn't do either of them all the time. And sometimes printmaking can get frustrating, where you're just like, okay, now I'm just following this kind of thing, this prescription that I've written out of what this is going to look like. But then there are the surprises. And I feel like my printmaking now is allowing for more surprises than I used to. I used to be a bit more, even more thought out.
Do you think that evolution occurred because of painting, or you just think as you've gotten older, you're allowed to be a little bit more flexible?
I think both, actually. I've allowed myself to have more mistakes, which I think is helpful, and
which is probably a good lesson to share with young artists. Can you speak for a moment on the value of making mistakes and how that has helped you?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like when you're first, especially when I first got to art school, it's like you want to draw like the perfect face or the perfect whatever, and that's like the goal, and I'm horrible at drawing faces. But then, I think I struggled with that throughout the whole time. And my teachers were always like, just go with the color, or just be a little bit more free or whatever. And I was like, I want it to be perfect though. Like I want it to look like the thing that it is. And I feel like you see that with a lot of artists. Like you look at, Van Gogh or many of those artists, they start with, or Picasso, they're really looking to try to make something look like something. And somewhere along the line, and I don't really know but all of a sudden I realized that I didn't care as much. It was more like, what am I getting out of it and the feeling out of it? And I enjoy it so much more now.
So that very freeing feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just like the biggest judge is you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like letting go of the idea of perfection and just being an excellence is such a great thing. And it doesn't matter if your painting even ends up how you thought. Being an excellence is more just about enjoying the process to get there, because you also always have another opportunity to paint or even repaint or recreate this.
Yeah. And I feel like sometimes it's hard in not all society, but there's, I've struggled a little bit with my dad with everything used to look like something, and now every once in a while I have a painting that's a little bit more abstract or something, and it's like, ooh, what is that? And I'm excited about it because it feels like growth to me. It feels like, wow, I just experienced something different. But it's sometimes hard when you put that out there and people are like, oh, she got worse. Because there's this perception it should look more like something rather than less as you go.
But it's just a different style.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
That's pretty funny. So do you think it's harder to do abstract versus something more realism because it's like you're a little bit more exposed on the canvas?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I feel myself moving a little bit more towards not worrying if it looks like something. And I think once you get into that brain, that part of my brain, when I'm just seeing color, and I'm just totally immersed in what's happening, it ends up looking more like something than you think because you took your head out of it. Because otherwise we're like, oh, eye looks like this. But if you take your head out of it, you end up with something that's actually better.
You trust yourself, you trust your skill. In a way, you even trust the paint and the canvas. Mm-hmm. This inspiration, this moment's coming together, and let it happen. And sometimes the worst thing you could do is put too much thought into it.
Yep, exactly.
So I want you to grab that the sketch or the ink one more time, and then before we started rolling, you had something exciting to share about it. So
So just yesterday, actually, this is going to be on the cover of December's Bozeman magazine. So I'm pretty excited about that. I submitted it. We actually submit articles at the museum as I'm the curator there for history every month. And I thought, well, why have I never submitted my art? I should try that, and they loved it. So I'm really excited to have it out there. I did submit it for the Christmas stroll poster, and it didn't win. So I'm excited to have this as a consolation prize.
Christmas stroll is going to be weird anyway. So this will be the December issue.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
What was your first feeling that came up when you heard that call or you got that email?
Definitely excited. It made it feel like it was worth it because I did. When I was doing this, I thought, hey, I should enter it, for the Christmas stroll. That way it gives me kind of a deadline, let's keep up on this. And so when I didn't get that, which it's always, who knows. But I was like, oh man, now what do I do with it? And so it's nice to know that it's going to be seen by people. Eventually I would like to do a show. I want to do about a dozen prints to have my own show of prints, but it's going to take a while to get there. So it's nice that it's already going to kind of be out there a little bit of exposure.
And so then I want you just to give our listeners any lesson on submitting art or working in that medium.
Yeah, for submitting, there are actually so many opportunities if you're paying attention to everything. So the one thing is most of them don't pay at all, which is fine. For this, I'm excited for the exposure, and I wasn't really expecting anything, so that was great. But that is one thing to take into account is most places they're just it's just to get your work out there, and I feel like some artists when you go into you're like, oh, I'm gonna make so much money by submitting it. That's not. In fact, a lot of times you have to pay to submit to some of these things, so that's tricky as well.
So figure out if it's worth the pay versus the possible exposure.
Exactly.
And then don't be afraid to put yourself out there.
Yep, definitely, yeah.
And what about one lesson for working in ink?
Yeah, there's no wrong way to do it, really. I took printmaking in college, and they'd actually gotten rid of the drawing program at Western Oregon, and that was my other focus. So it was my 5th year of college, and they're like, try printmaking. I had never done it before. So I was stuck in advanced printmaking for the first time ever, and it was terrifying. But I'm so glad that I learned screen printing And I also learned block printing as well, but screen printing you can do at home, which is so great. I have a very small studio, and it's all materials that you can use right there. You can build your own screens if you want to. Block printing on a small scale you could also do at home. You get these little presses, but I just feel so blessed that I didn't learn like etching where you have to have acid or something. Like that would be so difficult. So this is a great way to get into printmaking because it's inexpensive and you can't really mess up. There's so many different ways to do it, and it does kind of lend itself more towards drawing a little bit. So if that's something that you're interested in, it kind of works similarly. Whereas block printing, you have to like think of everything backwards, and there's just a bit more to it. But I think screen printing is a great way to get into it.
So after you took that class, did you just love it right away and continue, or did you take that class, put it aside, and then kind of rediscover your love for it later on in life?
Yeah, I pretty much I got excited and got right into it actually. So when I got home from college, I started doing note cards. So these are some of the ones, this is one of my first ones that I started working on. But these I found I could do at the kitchen table at home because I moved back home with my parents. So and there's still ink on their table from all the time.
Wow, it's a new creative piece.
Yeah,
you know? Maybe
yeah.
one day the table will be for sale.
Exactly, yeah. So these were like little works of art that I could do. My parents have a gallery there as well, so it was something that they could also sell, and they've done great. Although I have to say, like usually I'm doing the markets this for the Christmas season, but of course due to this year, there's not really a lot of options, and I haven't had to work on printing thousands of these this year, and so it's allowed me to do other creative things, and that's been really great. So sometimes when things like take off and sell well, sometimes you're like, well, that's great, but I'm kind of over printing chickadees. Like maybe that's why Warhol had his factory of people, because it does get
Yeah, it's
monotonous.
funny. It's like all we ever think about is succeeding, but success means that you have to do more work.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
Did you always know you wanted to be an artist? Or like when did you know that art was your calling in life?
I've always liked to draw. When I was a kid, I'd copy Looney Tunes cartoons and things like that, and I think my parents always knew I was going to be an artist, but when I got to high school, I just it wasn't my thing. I actually resented it. Just
Really?
I am not going to be an artist. We didn't necessarily have the greatest art teacher, and I just struggled. Like I didn't feel like I was pushed, and then I felt like, maybe it's that rebellious. This is what my parents think I'm good at, so I'm not doing that. So it really took a year after high school when I don't know, my mom just kind of like pushed me to go to school in Powell, and I didn't know what I was really going to do with it. She's just like, you're good at art, start there, we'll try that out. And I loved it. The program there was amazing. I mean, they're incredible there.
And so you went there, art, but what specific medium, or is it kind of just you were exploring what medium you wanted to take further?
Kind of an exploration when you're there, but definitely painting. I focused in on that. And the first year I wouldn't touch oils. She's like, no, I paint acrylic. And they're like, no, you should branch out. You should see what these are like. But they seem so scary to me. I mean, you got all these chemicals and everything, and they're not scary at all.
Well, it's funny, as someone who now has gone on to work in so many different mediums,
Mm-hmm.
and something totally as different as like the loom and writing, that you would be afraid to try.
Yeah.
So it just kind of over the years, you just kept pushing yourself?
Mm-hmm.
And how did you overcome that initial hesitation?
I think it's really when I was on my fifth year in my BFA program, Western Oregon University, and I was forced into printmaking. I say forced because I really was like, that just seems very weird and scary to me. And learning that I loved it, like it was a totally different medium, different way of thinking, and it was fine. Like I really enjoyed it, and it made me wish I'd done more. I really wish I'd experienced more. I did try ceramics, and that's not my thing. That's the one thing I found was not.
Well, you only know by trying, and
Yep.
I think there's such a great lesson, and you talk about how scared you were to do that
Mm-hmm.
printmaking, and it was like you really pushed your comfort zone so far that when you realized you liked this thing that you thought was so far outside your comfort zone, how wide that created space for you to be creative.
Mm-hmm.
And then how did you just kept from there experimenting with new things, and you realized you liked some more than others?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I'm always picking up something new. I tried bookbinding a couple months ago, and it's too meticulous for me. I
What
didn't
is
enjoy it as
bookbinding?
much. So I was creating my own journals. I thought, as a printmaker, I haven't really expanded into putting my images on different things. I've kind of done the cards and I've done prints, and that's it. But it's a medium where you can put it on T-shirts, you can put it on things like books. So I thought, hey, I can make my own journals and things like that. And it wasn't as calming or rewarding or anything. There's a lot of glue, and it just kind of got a little fussy for me. But I don't know. I always like to try new things. I do get frustrated if I'm not good at it, because I tend to pick up things really quickly. I taught myself to knit when I first went back home, and crochet, and if it's not coming quickly, I struggle with it a little bit.
Has there been any medium that you're able to push through that initial hesitation, or the fact that you do so much that you're like, I'll just go do something else?
Actually, weaving a little bit. I got really excited, ordered a loom, and I was like, this is going to be so great. And then I got a book at the library about how you put the yarn on the loom, and it was like, oh no.
Still use books? That's not something you YouTube?
Yeah, no, well, I like books. So it seemed like too much. And honestly, if I hadn't already ordered it, I may have been like, maybe not.
But you're committed.
It's not that bad. Yeah. Once I've learned, it's, you kind of come up with how I put on a TV show or whatever while I do it, because it's not the most fun part. But after that, it's great after that.
But there's always something to be learned, even in quote-unquote failure. You might not have liked something, but you're probably learning new skill, and you're even sharpening muscles in your hands that may come to affect your painting in ways you hadn't even noticed. You talked about that you like books, which you like books that you've written 2 so far.
Yep.
How about you talk about being a writer versus being an artist? Are you using the same, you think, like creative inspiration as an artist? Do you think your creativity as a writer comes from someplace else?
I think a little bit of the same. I wrote a history of Cook City. I grew up there, and I didn't know anything about it, really, to tell you the truth, especially the mining aspect. And
that's the story of how a railroad never came, right?
Yep, exactly. Yeah. And my parents being environmentalists, we didn't really learn about the mining a whole lot, so it was cool to learn about my heritage in a different way. And then the second book about Seth Danner execution, I work in the building where he was executed, and many of the places where he lived are still around here. So I think so much of it still comes down to place. Like in my art, I'm just really inspired by being there. I think I would have a hard time writing a book about some place I haven't been. And I couldn't experience that. When I was investigating the Danner murders, I went out to the murder site, and I, went to the cemetery, all these different places places where he worked, and just to experience that, I think, is important to me. So I think it does come down to kind of the same sort of things in a way, is that place is very important, because I think that's also what creates who these people are. For the Cook City people, place was everything, because they couldn't get the railroad there because of the location.
And when you paint, especially you do plein air painting, you go out there and I'm going to paint this song, and I'm going to have an end painting. And that is totally different than a book, because you know that you're working on such a long time that you really need to keep a schedule. How difficult is that, to be able to just keep working on the same piece when it's so different than how you approach art?
It's very difficult. I have to come up with a schedule. Otherwise it's down to the wire every time. The research part, I can fly through that. I love it. I feel like it is gathering these little bits of information and trying to piece things together. When it comes to sitting down and writing it feels like torture. I just really struggle. I'm a good writer, I know, but there's something about it that's tricky for me. It feels like homework. More so. Once I get into it, sometimes it's okay. But I definitely couldn't write about anything that I don't have a passion for or have a real interest in. And also I've noticed things that people have already written about, or have already, I couldn't write a book on John Bozeman, because it's already been investigated and done. I really like to look for things that haven't really been done before. And that's where I get excited, maybe because nobody can prove you wrong, because nobody's written about it before. But the writing part's hard, and then
it makes it harder on the research, but that's the part you enjoy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It does take a lot more research. but you're digging up things that are brand new, or some things people haven't ever looked at or made those connections. So that's really cool. But there's a whole another aspect that they don't tell you about writing, is like the editing process. And
there's no good writing, only good rewriting.
Yeah, exactly. And I work with the History Press Arcadia, and I'm working on 2 books currently that are going to be about murder and mayhem, and the other one is Wicked Bozeman. So
such positive, light
I know,
subjects, huh?
I know. Which for anybody that knows me, I hate violent things. So I have no clue why I get so interested in this. But working in the jail, I think we have the records and everything, so it's really cool. And to see why people did, the things that they did. But yeah, it's like when it comes down to that editing, they really do a lot to help with the editing, but then you have to read through each page, and I never want to read my books again, By the time you get to the end and you're supposed to give presentations on them, you're like, oh man, I'm done with this. It gets difficult.
How much do you think the patience of writing a book has translated or helped you in your other art, or maybe in other facets of your life?
I think it's helped me slow down a little bit in some aspects and work on little pieces. I'm starting to really appreciate the idea that, like, if you want to, recently read a quote where it's like, if you want to make a big change, you'll notice that that's harder to like follow up on and actually reach that goal. But if you make these little small changes, sometimes you can make a big impact. And I feel that more with writing, because I do like, I'm just going to research this today, and that's a piece. Where instead of like, I got to research, write, and all this stuff. So I feel like when it comes to some of these other aspects, especially like weaving, I got to put the yarn on the loom, that's just like step 1, or I got to like prep the screen, and that's like step 1. But to have the end product, it all kind of like comes together. So I often have more than one project going at a time. So on a weekend, I'll like go to the studio, prep a screen, go weave for a while or paint or something, and then come back, next layer, and just kind of like work through it, a couple different things at a time.
So when you use ink, you're much more in your head and you know exactly what you're trying to get out. When you're in plein air, you go there and you discover what it is you're trying to paint. Where do you fall that in writing? Are you much more of an outline writer, or are you one who discovers more on the page when the page starts being written?
I just try to start with an outline. A lot of times they kind of have you come up with an outline so they know what it is that you're going to be writing about when you submit. But after that, it kind of, some things write themselves. For the Danner book, I ended up talking to some of the relatives, and that informed like the whole end piece of the book that I didn't have in mind when I started writing. So much of it was like, how does his life affect everybody that came after him, all of his kids and descendants, and I didn't see that coming. And that, I think, is the best part of the whole book. And it came along the way as I talked to people, and because you never know when you're doing research, you kind of have that this murder occurred, this, that. But when you get to talk to real today people, I had no clue what was going to happen. And some people were really receptive and kind, and I used a lot of their words in the book. And some people were really upset that I was doing research on this, or still had anger. It was interesting, and I had no clue what was coming.
Stephen King describes writing to him as uncovering a fossil. Like, he doesn't quite know, but as he starts working on it, the story starts to reveal itself.
Yeah.
And that's kind of part of the fun process. So writing is one thing. Now a totally different medium is the loom.
Yeah.
So how did you talked about that this was one of the more frustrating things. So what was the inspiration for you then to jump into this, and how have you progressed in this medium that you found one of the most frustrating?
Yeah, so I'm on Pinterest all the time looking at things, and started seeing like, people do like these weavings, and you get like this little loom, and I'd seen like the Weavers Guild and their things at the market and such. I thought, gosh, it'd be cool, and it seems like it'd be faster than knitting, because I do knit, and I'm a slow knitter, and it's hard. I used to make these Norwegian mittens, but they took like days, and you can't charge enough for that. So I'm always looking for different ways to be able to use my creativity in a different way. And so I just kind of looked one up, and I thought, I think I'm gonna buy one. And so I just like picked the smallest that they had. I thought maybe I'll hate it like bookbinding and not ever want to do it again. And then I got a book on how you get the yarn onto the loom. And that kind of scared me because my loom hadn't arrived yet. I was like, there's a lot of things that come with that. And I have a small apartment. I don't necessarily have all the materials, but persevering through it, and it's been so much fun because this is really a medium where I don't know what's going to happen necessarily.
Really? It's kind of interesting because to me, just the structure of the loom seems to keep it more in check, or that this is that you would have the most, like, this is how it will be at the end.
Yeah, I don't plan at all. One of the things I have been doing is I'm inspired, of course, by nature, by what's around me. So I've been taking photos and using those colors as inspiration. It's also something I like to include. I've sold a couple scarves and I put the photo with it.
Did you?
Yeah. So I made this one and these ones here. So this one was inspired by a picture I took on the Galligator Trail. One of the trees was in yellow, and there's like that little bit of blue sky, and so I like pick my colors from that. This one was from Paradise Valley, the mountains, as you're like looking up onto some of those. And then this one was like a fall photograph, but I feel like that informs the color choice. So it's almost opposite printmaking, because I know exactly what colors I'm going to use. I like pull them all out. Oh, these are going to go really well together. And then design-wise, when you're kind of putting on the yarn, that's where I do plan a little bit, like what colors do I want next to each other, how big of gaps. A lot of it's though, like I just start going and go, oh, I'm going to do this. But it's actually when your weft yarns, which are the ones that go back and forth, when they hit what this is like the warp, when they like come together, you don't know what's going to happen. Anyway, I don't. Maybe experienced weavers do. But for me, it's like, oh, that's the color that makes. And sometimes, like, the red, it's going to like tone it down, or it's going to bring different things out. So that's where I have no idea what it's going to look like. And I'm excited by that because it's just so random. And sometimes I'll kind of like, oh, I'm going to do 18 inches of gray and then 18 inches of whatever. But I did some like this one where I just kind of went random, like, oh, I'm going to put in a little bit more brown or a little bit more whatever to see what happens. But
so has this changed your understanding of color theory?
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
And how has that helped affect you in your other mediums?
I think I haven't been weaving for very long, but I feel like it's going to be helpful, especially with printmaking. What colors go well together, what tones, because one thing that you also have to like think about is this yellow the exact same kind of medium kind of tone as the gray, and then sometimes they'll just disappear into each other even though they're different colors, and I feel like that could definitely be helpful for printmaking, and vice versa also. And I did do some other types of like weavings, wall hanging type of things, which that was totally random. This is even like more of an abstract thing for me, because I can just, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, which is even like more so than that. But I'm so excited because there are so many different things that you can do with it. And I love creating art that people can wear. I've been making jewelry, and make these ones actually, but I do kind of just shapes and local stones and things like that. So to create art that people can wear is exciting, and then to make that into a place, I think is important as well.
How much did knitting help you with weaving, or there's actually not that much crossover?
It doesn't seem like there's a ton of crossover. I'm really excited how fast you can weave, because I've been making like a scarf a day.
It just made you appreciate this much more, much
Yes.
better, because you're so much faster at it.
Yep, yeah, exactly. It would take me forever to knit a scarf in the same amount of time. But yeah, I don't know if there's a whole lot, other than I had a ton of yarn. So it's been nice to use what I have. And well, one thing that was really interesting is I have like a lot of wool yarns that I would knit with, and they would knit up like really pretty soft and nice, and for mittens and such. When I tried to weave with them, something about the way that it tightens the fibers, it was like, oh, nobody's gonna want to wear this. This is like not. So I've switched. I've actually been using a lot of acrylics, but I'm really looking forward to trying silks, and I needed to make sure I was good and enjoyed weaving before I was going to invest in different fibers, but I usually go more natural, and that was surprising to me, that just the way that the yarn reacts.
So of all the mediums that you create, which is your favorite?
Right now, weaving.
right now.
I can do it every night, all the time. Printmaking right now is a big one for me. I kind of go through cycles. When we do plein air every year, it's like painting is my life. It's all I do.
Is that only in the summer, or do you do that all year round?
Mostly summer. The plein air event is in August, so it's about a week long, and I usually do prep before that just to kind of get myself into it. And mostly summer. I tried some winter painting, and it's miserable.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Do it.
And it's nice you're inside already, it's dark early, so you can just get to weaving, you can put something on the background.
Same with printmaking, it's all in the studio.
So you get to stay creative, and that's cool, because it's like each season you look forward to that one special medium.
Yeah, definitely.
And we are in the winter season, and it is the holiday season, so do you have any ideas that you could give for someone who might be looking for a one-of-a-kind art or a one-of-a-kind gift to give someone?
Yeah, definitely. So I do have a website and an Etsy, Mountain Studio 308. And I've been selling, so I have my scarves on there, and I'm putting up new ones every day, pretty much. And they do come with the photo of the place, which I think is cool, just to really, it's unique. It makes it different, I think, than other places and scarves. I also am participating in Small Gems show in Livingston at the Livingston Art Center, and so they actually have a lot of artists, a lot from Bozeman this year, because there wasn't a whole lot for us to be able to put our art into this year. So they have pieces that are 12 inches and under, and usually a lower price point, so they're a great place to go for gifts as well.
And when is that?
That I think it just started.
It's continuing.
Yep.
Ongoing.
Yeah, and they have them online, and then you can also go to their gallery as well. And I currently.
And what was that gallery?
It's the Livingston Art Center.
Livingston Art Center.
Yeah, and I do have a show up at Cafe M right now of my paintings as well.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So I've been asking this question, and this is kind of how we'll start to wrap up.
Mm-hmm.
It has been a tough year for obvious reasons, and that has translated into disruption of people's schedule of being creative. As someone who's done so much during this time, what's one lesson that you give to people of staying creative or getting back into the saddle if they've been disrupted during tough times?
Yeah, for me, it's actually been a blessing in a way. Not having art shows means I don't have to mass produce note cards this year, which is it's a good source of income for me. But I'm able to try different outlets or things that I don't know if they're going to be good sellers or not, So it's allowed me to do that. Also, when we first went into quarantine, or not quarantine, but the stay-at-home order, I live alone, and everything. I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a lot. So it actually made me look for a way to process through it on my own, and to be okay, make this a productive time. And so I decided to paint flowers during that time. And so I ordered flowers online, which was great. In the spring is about March, I guess, when all that happens. And so that cheers you up right away to have fresh flowers. And then I was painting still lifes of those, and I teamed with the Livingston Art Center, and they showed my artwork in their windows, which was also cool because a lot of people saw that and was like, oh, this is cheery, this is different. So for me, that helped out a lot. Plus it also got me into painting. It kept me going. So for me, it's been really great. I've also found different outlets. I mean, not having the Christmas shows is hard. I usually did pretty good, especially the Emerson was one of my biggest shows. So to not have that for financial reasons is hard, but I've been finding a lot of outlets, a lot of galleries that have, been really helpful, and people are looking online a lot more. So it's also prompted me to redo my website. Make sure that my Etsy is up to snuff, and then I've also been doing newsletters out to people who've purchased stuff before. So it's forced me to think of my business in a different way, which I think is a good thing.
I love what you said in the beginning, the idea of you didn't have all those shows, but what it also did is free you from pressure.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
And it's been such an unprecedented year for everyone for so many reasons, so you don't have to worry so much about the end product, but you actually can enjoy some of the free time that it created because you don't have to be so caught up and you have to create this. And so there's room to play in that void that seems sad, but is really room for you to explore creatively.
Exactly, yeah. And I feel like a year from now, when we do have shows, I'm going to have a totally different booth than I would have last year, because it's going to include weaving now and prints and all these things that I wouldn't have had otherwise. I probably would have stayed kind of, the same.
Yeah, so forced you to grow.
Yep, exactly.
And so what's the best way or best place online that people could find out more about you or your Etsy shop?
So mountainstudio308.com is a good place. I do have a Facebook as well. They all have the same name, Mountain Studio 308. But my website has links to all of that, so that would be the best place to be able to reach me.
Great. Kelly, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Everyone, I hope you learned something about being a multi-talented artist and how taking chances could really expand your creativity and open up new possibilities. And we'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye.